This video continues where the last one left off. So how do you develop a story? Well, I would say get to know the person you're designing the house for. Get to know them well enough by asking them questions about the principles and elements of design. Ask them to tell you their story. Most people are willing to do that, especially when they're, interested in you understanding them on a project like this. And so, here we go, right? When you create a story, you must answer the following questions. Whose story is it? And it's not yours. And this is a big mistake a lot of designers make across the spectrum. They think they're telling their story. It's not about you. And I don't mean that mean. You're the artist, so there's clearly you in it, and it's your work and your design. But unless it's your house, it ain't your story. It's your client's story. So which character's point of view will you tell the story from? Each point of view is unique and has limitations and biases. Say you have multiple characters. How are you going to overlap them? When should the story begin and end? Does it begin at the front door, or does it begin sooner? Most of us would say sooner, right? You can choose to start and end your story at any point in place and time. Most of us choose the story when you first see the site. Different entry points into and exit points out of the story will have its own degree of intrigue. And so you want to think about that as well. Where will you view the building from? Winchester Mystery House. I don't know if you guys heard of that, but Sarah Winchester inherited, after her husband died, inherited their mansion, and she believed it was haunted, and that in order to stop the I'm trying to think what she was stopping, violence or something she was trying to alter, she continued to build. So she was constantly adding. And so if you take a tour through the house, you can't go anywhere by yourself because you get lost. It's that big. There are stairs that lead to nowhere. There are doors that lead to nowhere. There are windows that look back into the house itself. I mean, it's just this constantly evolving story. And what's really interesting is it truly represented her paranoia. I mean, she was constantly building out of fear. And the architecture ended up representing that. It did truly represent Sarah Winchester in the end. So you also have to think, what is the theme? And here's an example. In Chile, there's the relationship between the state and the First Nations. And so they tend to end up fighting from time to time. And in order to try to alleviate some of that conflict, there are these large public works that try to bring in connectivity and respect for the indigenous peoples. And this is an example, and that's why that's in Spanish. Every artist eventually develops their own style. You can eventually look at a body of somebody's work and see their fingerprints. And you don't want to copy someone else's style. I mean, you'll just never do it as well as they do because their style is based on who they are. You can only become best at finding your own style. Most stories are constructed using a chain of events, and here's an example. The chain of events in the design of this floor plan begins with the initial circulation diagram and then refines into the plan zoning. It refines into the plan zoning that eventually leads to the finished floor plan, right? So that's the chain of events. That's the causality. The initial planning bubble diagram is based on the story, but then it evolves further from there. When the link between cause and effect is easy to see, the solution to the puzzle is easy. So when the link is more challenging, it makes it more stimulating and more satisfying to solve. Now, I will say that example can be when you're watching a movie and it's right to the point that the protagonist is about to make a decision and the movie ends. Everybody's like, oh, what happened? What happened? Well, the artist wanted you to decide what would happen. They wanted the ending to be yours. And I know that upsets a lot of people, but I actually like that because I continue to think about it. So sometimes when we make design decisions, we want to do that with a sense of mystery. We allow the person to decide what comes next. Where will they go next? It's not always clear cut. In wayfinding, maybe we're not forcing people to decide. Maybe we're going to have a more open floor plan that's going to allow them to meander and kind of explore the place without any real set of forced directions. I know I tell you guys the rules and then I tell you how to break them. Because I'm obviously in the rule breaking phase myself. I've been at this a long time. Because I think it's once you start breaking the rules, that's when your work really gets good. And that's why almost every artist, regardless of what field of art they're in, you can look at their early work and it's mostly bad and boring, banal, because they were following the rules. But you have to go through that, right? It's like you don't get a butterfly unless you're first a caterpillar. So the author of the story should present clues that are solvable but not too easy. And that's why often artists explain their work. And then we're like, oh, wow, that's cool. I didn't see it. It's okay. And so the main thing I want to ask you all now is, what stories will you tell? Because you're going to find this work far more enjoyable if you invest in storytelling. It makes the creative process more fun and it makes it more personable. You'll have better relationships with your clients if you focus on telling their stories. With some exceptions. I always like to add that caveat. There's always somebody who defies the generalizations, but we have to make the generalizations just to be able to communicate. Okay, and then these are the references for this PowerPoint. And so I would encourage you all to go through this, a little more slowly and explore it a little further. I just wanted to give you an overview to explain some of the stuff that maybe was a little obscure or not quite detailed enough just in the description there. The links will take you to some examples. But yeah, really, really think about how now the symbolism and storytelling really start to come together. And you see how this now is actually going to make your life easier. So just say, for instance, I'm going to use my mother-in-law is part Cherokee, and she's really into wolves. And there's a lot of symbolism in Native American culture that is tied to wolves. And if I were designing a house for her, I would use that. And I would use those stories to talk about why I picked the colors I did and the materials I did and how I oriented the view of the house. I would use those kinds of things, and the story of the wolf and how she's the strong matriarch of the family. And so you see, you kind of start to pull that stuff out. And now, it's not just walls and doors. Not that those can't be cool in and of themselves, but where you put them matters. And if you want your clients to end up with design that is more than walls and doors randomly placed, this is the process. Okay, we're going to stop storytelling here. I'm sorry. Yeah, storytelling here. Trying to make sure I was in the right place. And continue into the next lecture.